The Zelda games have a timeline, and after Ocarina of Time, it splits in 3. One where Link won, another where the fight was prevented, and the last one where no hero was available. But what happened to the world and the people in the child timeline? Here, Ganondorf and Link never fought with each other. It was all prevented. But there was a war. Well, let's find out. In this timeline, Link was sent back to his original time, following the defeat of Ganondorf. He warned Princess Zelda and the King of Hyrule of the tragic future that awaited the kingdom involving Ganondorf if nothing was done. After warning the royal family of Hyrule, Link and Zelda spent a short amount of time together. After this, Link leaves Hyrule in search for his fairy companion Navi, who left him behind at the end of his quest, and so young Link heads to Lon Lon Ranch to borrow his horse Epona. After this, the events of Majora's Mask take place, where he fights with Majora. But what happens to Hyrule in that time period? Well, nothing good, since Ganondorf was going to invade Hyrule with force, but thanks to Link, they were prepared. And so a bloody war ensued between the Kingdom of Hyrule and Ganondorf and his Gerudo. And in the end, the Hylians captured Ganondorf. Several years after the failure of his attempted invasion, Ganondorf was taken prisoner in the Arbiter's Grounds prison. When the ancient sages tried to execute him, however, they discovered to their horror that he had a Triforce of power. So they activated the Mirror of Twilight and sent him into the Twilight Realm. Here, Ganondorf languished for years until he met Zend and promised him power in exchange for freedom from his prison. Alright, first, what could have happened during that war? What went down? Well, like I said before, they ended up losing. The army of the Hylians and their allies were too strong. In the beginning, they had the element of surprise going for them, since the king had to react fast. So at the start of the war, they probably moved inward, covering a lot of ground and taking pieces of the land bit by bit. However, the Hylian war machine really started to fire up a bit later in the conflict. This probably forced the Gerudo to retreat. From that point on, it was pushing back and forth, but this kind of depends on how strong the Hylians are. But in the end, Ganon's forces would be pushed back all the way to their base, and they lost, since they probably couldn't run anywhere from that point on. And the Hylians would try to cut off their supplies, essentially starving them to death. This happens a lot in wars. But in what ways did the world change thanks to this? And what happened to the Hylians and the other races? Well, let's compare the world of Ocarina of Time with the one of Twilight Princess to see what kind of damage this war caused. Let's first talk about some iconic places in Ocarina of Time, to see if they're still there. Let's start with Hyrule Castle. Well, by the looks of it, this one was hit by a huge attack, since the one that we see in Twilight Princess is a new one. The old one is located in the woods, together with the ruins of the Temple of Time and the Master Sword. Since Ganondorf tried to invade Hyrule, he must have attacked Hyrule Castle itself at some point. It's the heart of the kingdom after all. It might even be that he controlled Hyrule Castle for a while, and that's why they had to abandon it. But we can't be sure about that, of course. However, one thing is sure. They had to abandon the city, since it would have been easier to rebuild Hyrule Castle and the town than leave it. But apparently they lost it for some reason and built a new capital more north, which is also multiple times bigger than the old one. Now what about Zora's domain and the inhabitants? Well, this place became even bigger than it already was. The Zora developed a lot. So were they hit hard by the Gerudo? Well, most likely not. It's still in the same place. Some sort of. If you take the map of Twilight Princess and Ocarina of Time and turn the one of Twilight Princess upside down, you can see that they are almost exactly the same. So looking at that, it didn't really change location. You need to keep in mind that the map of Twilight Princess is around twice the size of Ocarina of Time, so everything is blown up a bit because of that. Besides that, we didn't find any ruins of old Zora settlements anywhere, so they probably stayed in the same area. They expanded mostly and built a more organized and technologically advanced society. Of course, they helped the Hylians during the war with Ganondorf, their allies after all, and this might explain the new warrior gear the Zoras have. The guards wear fish-shaped helmets over their faces and carry halberds with them. This is something we didn't see in Ocarina of Time. They probably started building a small army, weapons and armor around the time of Ganon's invasion, since they didn't have any. And in general, it's all quite handy for defending yourself and fighting. So hey, it's quite logical that they started producing them. Now what about Death Mountain? Are the Gorons still doing well? And can they still survive there? Well yes, surprisingly enough, the Goron population is doing amazing. There are tons of them, and everything seems to be fine. One notable thing once Link reaches Death Mountain is the Goron Mines. In Ocarina of Time, this wasn't a thing. The Goron Mines are notable for featuring several forms of advanced technology. It deploys several complex machines that operate to keep the place functional, including magnetic cranes, elevators, and minecarts. Why would they build a mine? Well, it could be that it was made in order to supply the armies during Ganon's invasion. Hylians would need steel for armor and weapons, and we know that the conflict lasted for a couple of years. This would also explain why they don't really use it anymore. There is no need. If they build it in order to make money, they would have kept it running. The Gorons are known to be skilled metalsmiths. Metal constructions are seen around the face of Death Mountain to provide access to areas which are otherwise unreachable. In Ocarina of Time, we have seen multiple Goron smiths, and like I said, this wasn't here during Ocarina of Time, and the only thing that makes sense is a war. That requires a ton of resources, and besides that, nothing else happened during that time that could explain why they built a mine at one point and ended up abandoning it. Now some of you might say, what about the metal around Death Mountain? Well, that's not enough to build an entire mine for. And still, why would they abandon it then, afterwards? Even when Link helped the Gorons and everything is completely fine, they don't use it. Now what about the Kokiri and the forest they live in? Do we see them in Twilight Princess? Well, no. Kokiri Forest as we know it is nowhere to be found in Twilight Princess. There is only one place that's similar to it, and that's Faron Woods. Here we find a group of monkeys, and they are most likely the Kokiri. Now before you start wondering how that's possible, I will give you an example from another game. In the Wind Waker, the Kokiri had transformed into the Koroks following the Great Flood. They continue to live with the Great Deku Tree on an island called Forest Haven. So clearly they can take on different forms. Nintendo also confirmed this. Now why do I think that the monkeys are the Kokiri? Well, they have markings on their arm that resemble the emblem of the Kokiri. That's already a huge sign that there's a connection with the two. Besides that, a female monkey guides Link on his journey to the Sacred Grove, much like Saria did in Ocarina of Time. So there are clearly some connections to them, and we know that they can change forms. So could it be? Well, Hyrule Historia possibly debunks this theory, as it claims the only traces of the Kokiri left by time of Twilight Princess was their symbol in the Forest Temple, implying they completely died out rather than evolving into a new form. This could have happened during the invasion of Ganondorf, since murder was most likely part of the whole experience. And overall, the Kokiri aren't fighters as far as we could see in Ocarina of Time, so they wouldn't stand a chance, especially without the Great Deku Tree, since that one died long ago. So far we have only talked about the species that inhabit the Kingdom of Hyrule and are all allies of the Hylian King. But what about the bad guys? We know that Ganondorf was captured for trying to take over the kingdom, but what about his army? Well, since the Gerudo almost blindly follow him, we can assume that they helped him with trying to take over Hyrule. Actually, the ancient sages state that Ganondorf led them in an invasion of Hyrule in an attempt to establish dominion over the Sacred Realm. So we can be quite sure that they helped Ganon. And in Twilight Princess, we can't find them anywhere. So let's see what could have happened. Well, a lot of them were most likely killed, since that tends to happen during war, while the others fled the land in order to not get killed after they lost the fight. Why do I think this? Well, in the next game in the timeline, they return. We know that there are countries and lands close to Hyrule. Think of Labrina and Holodrum from the Oracle games. Some of the Gerudos most likely fled after the war, and some of them even before, since some don't like Ganon at all. For example, Naboru. Of course, Hyrule took over their land, and this is most likely the reason why the Arbiter's Ground is there. In Twilight Princess, it's not really used anymore, but it used to be a prison, and some speculate that it used to be the Spirit Temple. The Arbiter's Grounds bear many striking similarities to the Spirit Temple in architecture. For example, the Goddess of Sand appears at the top of the Arbiter's Grounds, and is also a prominent feature of the Spirit Temple. Also, the location is fitting, so it's possible that they are one and the same. But personally, I don't think this is the case. The outside and the inside are very different. It must have had a huge overhaul for it to be the Spirit Temple. Where it came from is a bit vague. The only option besides it being the Spirit Temple is that it was hidden in the Haunted Wasteland. This is a part of the Gerudo Desert area that we couldn't explore during Ocarina of Time, but in Twilight Princess, it's nowhere to be found. So this is an option. There's no concrete evidence for it, it's just a possibility. So take that with a grain of salt. So as you can see, the world was affected quite a lot after Ganon tried to invade it. Some races disappeared and great cities fell. However, so much more happened. But sadly enough, I can't make the video any longer, since we just don't have the time for it. But in the end, the world recovered and the land flourished. Hey, be sure to check out my other social media like Twitch, Twitter, Instagram and the Discord server. We do all kinds of fun things there, and tons of updates on new videos of course, so go have a look. Thanks for watching everybody, I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to subscribe since then we can get to 100k before my birthday, which is on June 17. So let's give it a try.